Well, Louise Hague is Shadow Transport Secretary. She joins us now. Thanks very much, Louise Hague, for being with us. Let's start. We're getting these extraordinary stories from on board some of these P&O ferries of people, agency workers in balaclavas coming on to try and escort now redundant P&O staff off boats. Is that something, first of all, that you're hearing? Because, again, we're hearing that P&O staff are not supposed to talk to the press. And what's your reaction to that?
Yes, I've heard and been speaking to directly with crew members and seafarers who overnight or this morning have been told that they will be losing their jobs and are now attempting to stay on the ships in order to try and fight for those jobs and protect themselves. Security firms and agency workers have been bussed in who are handcuff trained and are trying to remove those workers from the ships. And it's just unforgivable. It is frankly a complete and utter scandal that a company should be behaving like this on British soil, to tell hundreds of workers on Zoom, on a pre-recorded Zoom, that they're going to be losing their jobs, and then to try and physically remove them from their ships when they've done absolutely nothing wrong. There is absolutely no financial situation that P&O could be in that could merit this kind of behaviour.
Now, we're hoping to speak to the head of Nautilus, one of the unions, later in the programme. But are you having conversations with unions at the moment? And what are they advising? Because we're hearing some people have been told, don't get off those ships because you might find yourself locked out of your job. Should they be staying on board if they are there already?
Well, yes, the unions are advising that the workers stay on the ships, but clearly there are really serious health and safety concerns to this. If agency security workers are walking on wearing balaclavas and handcuff trained, then I'm fearful for the safety of those workers on those ships, but they're doing everything they can to protect and fight for their jobs. Frankly, this is nothing less than an assault on British seafaring, and all of us in opposition alongside our friends in the trade union movement and the government need to be doing everything we can to say this is completely unacceptable. No ifs, no buts. We cannot allow a company like P&O to treat their workers like this. And if it is legal, it stretches, credulity that it could be legal. And I know the RMT are seeking an injunction as we speak. But if it is legal, then we need to immediately make sure that we enact legislation to stop this ever happening again. But P&O received an enormous amount of taxpayers' money during furlough, and I'd want to see the government clawing every penny of that back if they continue down this path.
An injunction in part, presumably because there was no consultation on this before. What would a Labour government have sought to do with this? Because this was clearly kept secret from the government until now. No one seems to have known about this. What would a Labour government have done differently?
Well, yeah, I mean, we've all been caught on the hop. It's been a surprise to everyone this morning, but we've been calling on the government for years now to end fire and rehire, because this could well be what P&O are trying to do, get rid of its workforce and then hire them back on lesser terms and conditions and lesser pay. That's almost certainly what they will attempt to do in the coming weeks and months. We've also been calling over many years for domestic law to properly apply to international shipping routes, because this may well be one of the ways they're trying to get around this. We've seen over a decade now of an assault on workers' rights from successive Tory governments, and this is an unscrupulous company making use of the lax employment rights that we now have in this country. But the government has it in its power now to convene the workforce, convene the unions and the employer, and to look at every single lever that they have in government to make sure that P&O can't be allowed to get away with this.
When you say can't be allowed to get away with this, the problem is they've already fired them. They say they're going to give them a very generous compensation package, but the idea of them rehiring those same workers seems to be for the birds, doesn't it? What can the government do now?
Well, British Airways went through a similar process to this just a couple of years ago when they attempted to fire and rehire their staff. And actually, it was a concerted campaign led by the unions, but joined by politicians from across parties, that made British Airways rehire their staff on similar terms and conditions and stopped that assault on workers. So I would urge everyone to make clear their disgust at this. And it's reminiscent actually to something P&O did back in the 80s when there was a massive campaign around that, don't go P&O. Clearly that needs resurrecting if they're going to go ahead with this. But government does have levers in its power. It's given public money to that company. That should be clawed back, and it should be reviewing every single potential contract that it has with P&O or its parent company, DPW, which currently runs ports across the UK.
Mm. 800 people represents a fifth of P&O's workforce. I mean, it's a huge number. 800 people now suddenly finding themselves without jobs at a time like this. What does that mean for those people facing, you know, what we're all going to go through, the cost of living crisis?
Exactly. I mean, it's just absolutely devastating. We're in the middle of a catastrophe of living standards, petrol rising at the pumps, energy bills about to soar, and real wages are falling for the first time in a long time. This will mean breaking point for many families, particularly in the areas most affected, like Hull, around Dover. It's just absolutely heartbreaking. And I know those workers will be doing everything they can to save their jobs, but it is really reminiscent of what has been done before to these kind of workers back in the 80s under previous Tory governments, and it will lead many families and many communities to breaking point.
Yeah, no, it's a grim thought. Louise Hague, Shadow Transport Secretary, thanks very much for joining us here on Sky.